What would you do if your entire life was exposed in one sentence, at a family table, in front of everyone who mattered?
What do you do when the sentence that should never exist in a marriage is spoken out loud in front of everyone you love? That night, at a Christmas dinner table, crowded with relatives and noise and the smell of food, my wife looked at me and said, calm and clear, that our son was not mine and that she was taking half. No warning. No private conversation. Just those words, dropped like a plate shattering on tile. The room froze. Conversations died mid-breath. Even the children sensed something had broken. I remember looking around that table and realizing that although I was surrounded by people, I had never felt more alone in my life. What surprised everyone was not what she said. It was what I did not do next. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask questions. I did not react at all. I simply sat there, steady, watching her face, listening to my own heartbeat slow instead of race. Because that moment did not begin at that table. It began months earlier, in a place no one ever expects their life to crack open. Months before that dinner, my phone rang while I was on a job. It was my son's preschool. The teacher spoke softly, almost too calmly, and said he had broken out in hives. Nothing dangerous, she assured me. But they wanted him checked out. I dropped what I was doing and drove straight there. When I walked into the clinic, my boy was sitting on the exam table swinging his legs, trying to be brave. He reached for my hand when the nurse came in, squeezing hard as if my grip alone could keep the world steady. That is the side of fatherhood no one puts on greeting cards. Standing there pretending you are not scared so your child does not have to be. The doctor examined him and said it was likely an allergy, something manageable, nothing serious. Then she added they would run a full panel and asked me to come back to discuss the results in person. Those two words landed heavier than the diagnosis. In person. On the drive home, I took my son for ice cream like I promised. Chocolate smeared his face, laughter filling the car, life looking normal through the rearview mirror. Yet a quiet weight settled in my chest, the kind you cannot explain but cannot shake. A few days later, the call came. The nurse asked if I could come in alone. Not over the phone. Alone. Sitting in that small office, I prepared myself for bad news about his health. The doctor smiled and said he was healthy. Relief washed through me so fast it almost made me dizzy. Then she turned a page and mentioned his blood type. She said it gently, almost apologetically, explaining that his blood type did not align with mine and my wife's in the usual way. She was careful to say that medicine has exceptions, rare genetic variations, paperwork errors, things that can confuse a simple explanation. Blood type alone, she said, does not prove anything, but it can raise a question, a quiet question that refuses to leave once it is asked. I nodded, thanked her, and walked out telling myself the easiest story. This was nothing. A fluke. An anomaly. I repeated that lie all the way to my truck, but it did not fit the way it used to. I sat there with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel, listening to a voice I did not invite whispering, what if? What if this was not a mistake? I did not drive home. I turned into a small medical plaza I had passed 100 times without noticing. Discreet testing. Those words felt heavier than they should have. Inside, everything was calm, clinical, ordinary. The woman at the desk handed me a clipboard like this was any other Tuesday. Name, date of birth, reason for test. I paused longer than necessary at that last line. Signing my name felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. I paid for expedited processing. 72 hours, she said, like it meant nothing. It meant everything to me. Those 3 days stretched and collapsed at the same time. On the outside, I was the same father I had always been. Reading bedtime stories, packing lunches, carrying my son to bed when he fell asleep on the couch. On the inside, something was sinking. Every hug felt heavier. Every time he called me dad, something twisted deep in my chest. At night, my wife slept beside me, breathing steady, unaware that I was living a second life inches away. On the third night, my phone buzzed just after 2 in the morning. I slipped into the bathroom without turning on the light. The glow of the screen was enough. Your results are ready. My thumb hovered for a moment, long enough to feel like a lifetime. Then I opened the file. 0.0%. No dramatic language. No explanation. Just numbers. Numbers that drained the sound from the room. I read it again and again, searching for a footnote, a correction, anything that would let me set it down and breathe. There was nothing. I sat on the cold floor and felt everything inside me go quiet. Not breaking, not exploding, just shutting off. In that silence, with my wife asleep a few steps away, I understood something that would shape everything that came next. I could confront her, let anger take the wheel, and watch my life burn down in a single night. Or I could stay still and protect the one thing that mattered more than my pride. My son. Biology did not erase the years I had been his father. Losing control could erase my chance to keep being one. So I stood up, washed my face, and went back to bed. I did not say a word. From that moment on, I stopped reacting and started observing. I watched conversations more closely. I listened for what was said and what was not. I let the noise of daily life continue while I gathered myself in the quiet. That decision, made alone on a bathroom floor in the middle of the night, was the first move. Not an attack. A pause. And sometimes, a pause is the strongest move a man can make. Have you ever smiled through dinner, kissed your child goodnight, and then laid awake realizing you were living in a house where the truth had already left? After that night in the bathroom, after the numbers on my screen went to 0, nothing in my home could change on the outside. Not yet. I understood, in a way I never had before, that the first person to lose control usually loses the story. So I kept my voice steady, kept my routine intact, and walked through my days like a man carrying a secret in his chest that was too heavy to set down. In the mornings I packed lunches, tied small shoelaces, and helped my boy find the toy he swore he could not live without. In the evenings, I read dinosaur books and made bath time sound like an adventure. To anyone watching, I was the same husband, the same father, the same hard-working man who came home tired and tried to be present. But inside, I was rewinding the last 6 or 7 years like a film I suddenly realized had been edited. Every scene I once labeled normal started showing a second meaning. I began noticing the moments I had ignored because I wanted peace. The way my wife always nudged me toward longer hours, bigger jobs, more responsibility, always with that tone that sounded like respect. "You are the provider," she would say, like she was praising me. At the time, I took it as love. Now it sounded like placement, like a hand guiding a chess piece exactly where it needed to be. I remembered how she insisted our finances stay separate for safety. Independence, she called it. Responsible, modern, smart. I agreed because I trusted her, because I thought love and trust were supposed to make things simpler. But lying in the dark with a secret humming in my bones, I heard those conversations again and realized they all had the same shape. It was not about safety. It was about exits. It was about keeping the door unlocked for the day she decided to walk out. I remembered how she brushed off genetic testing when our son was born, how quickly she laughed and said there was no need. "He is clearly yours." Back then, I was tired and happy and proud. The way a new father is when life feels full. I let it go. Now, I could not stop thinking about how fast she shut that idea down, like she was swatting away a fly before it could land. What made it worse was how normal she seemed. She slept beside me, talked about grocery lists, asked about my day, and laughed at the same old jokes. She moved through our house as if nothing had changed, because for her nothing had changed yet. She still believed the truth belonged to her. And that is what almost broke me, not the betrayal itself, but the calmness of it. The ease, the way she could hold my hand while her plan sat quietly in her pocket. I would stand at the sink, washing dishes, listening to my son playing in the next room, and feel two forces pulling at me. One was anger, sharp and hot, begging for a confrontation. The other was something older and steadier, the instinct that tells a man if you blow up now, you might never get to tuck him in again. That instinct won. I learned to breathe through my own rage. I learned to look at my wife and see a stranger without letting it show. I learned to wait. The waiting would have destroyed me if I had not done one thing. I asked for help from someone who did not live in my house. The morning after I got the results, I told my wife I needed to check on a client. I kissed my boy on the head, took my truck keys, and drove downtown. I had searched for the right office the night before, not because I was ready for a war, but because I knew I could not walk into one unarmed. The sign on the door was simple: family law, asset protection. The waiting room smelled like coffee and printer ink, the smell of other people's lives being sorted into folders. The smell of the man I met, Jonathan Pierce, looked like someone who had seen every kind of heartbreak a courtroom can hold. He did not waste time. He shook my hand once, sat down, and said, "Tell me what is going on." So I told him: the clinic, the blood type, the test, the result, and the part I could barely say out loud. "My son is not mine biologically." Jonathan listened without flinching. He took notes, asked a few careful questions, and then he said the sentence that made my stomach drop in a different way. "Biology does not automatically undo legal fatherhood." In plain language, he explained that the law does not work like the movies. A lab report can change how you feel, but it does not automatically change what you are on paper. If your name is on the birth certificate, if you have been the father in the eyes of the state, then you are the father until a court says otherwise. That means you can still have rights, but it also means you have responsibilities. I asked him if I was trapped, if I was just going to lose anyway. He shook his head, not unkindly, and told me the truth that mattered. The court does not focus on who is angriest or who is most hurt. The court focuses on the best interest of the child. Those words did not sound dramatic, but they were everything. Best interest means stability, routine, safety. It means the person who shows up for the child consistently, who can keep life steady while adults are falling apart. Jonathan looked me in the eye and said something I will never forget. "If you lose your temper in this, you risk losing your son. Not because you are wrong, but because the court will not gamble with a child's stability. If you storm in yelling, you hand the other side a story they can sell. Unstable, aggressive, not safe." He told me to think like a father before I thought like a betrayed husband. On the drive home, the road looked the same, the traffic lights changed the same, but I felt like I had stepped into a different life. I knew then that this was not just about my pride or my money. It was about my son waking up one morning and being told that the man he calls dad is suddenly gone. I could not let that happen. So I made a decision that felt strange but necessary. I would not confront her yet. I would not ask her to confess. I would not let my emotions create the headline. I would build a case the way you build a roof, one measured piece at a time, until it can hold weight in a storm. That night I opened my laptop and started with the simplest truth. Proof of my life as a father. Not speeches. Not feelings. Proof. I downloaded bank statements from our accounts month by month. I saved receipts with my son's name on them. Preschool payments. Doctor visits. Clothes. Food. Anything that showed I had been there and I had provided. I created folders and backed them up. I took screenshots and saved them in more than one place. When my wife texted about money or the business, I did not argue. I saved it. When she asked questions that sounded less like a spouse and more like someone pricing a house before a sale, I noted it. Date. Time. What she said. I kept a simple log of who dropped my son off, who picked him up, who took him to appointments. I did not do it because I wanted to punish her. I did it because I finally understood that in family court, love is not evidence. Consistency is. At first, it felt unnatural, like I was turning my life into paperwork. My heart would pound the first time I saved a message, like I was doing something wrong. But then I would look at my boy asleep on the couch, his small chest rising and falling, and I would remember what Jonathan said. This is about his best interest. This is about making sure the adult who treats him like a person, not a pawn, is the one who can keep him safe. So I kept going. I learned to speak less and watch more. I learned to nod through conversations that used to feel normal, because now I could hear the strategy underneath. When she praised my work ethic, I heard her counting dollars. When she suggested new paperwork for the business, I slowed down and said I would have my attorney review it. I watched her face for that split second when the smile had to fight to stay in place. And somewhere in those days, the most painful realization arrived. This was not a mistake made in the heat of emotion. This was not an accident that happened and got buried under guilt. The pieces were too clean. The timing was too careful. The way she positioned herself was too deliberate. I could feel it, even before I had all the proof. This was not a wrong turn. It was a route. It was a plan. Still, I did not yet know how big the plan was, or how many people were in it, or what she intended to do when she finally pulled the trigger. I only knew that the woman sleeping next to me was not simply keeping a secret. She was building an ending. And if I wanted my son to have a steady beginning after the ending, I had to keep my hands steady and my eyes open. Have you ever felt the moment when a quiet suspicion finally finds its voice, not as a shout but as a whisper that changes everything? By the time the truth began to surface, I already knew one thing for sure. Whatever I was dealing with was bigger than a single lie, bigger than a careless mistake. I just did not know how deep it went or who else was standing in the shadows. That answer came one night when my phone buzzed with a name I did not expect to see. It was my wife's younger sister. We had never been especially close. She was polite, warm around family gatherings, but distant in the way people are when they do not want to step into something complicated. Her message was short and uneasy. She asked if we could talk somewhere private. Not at the house. Not on the phone. Somewhere quiet. The tone alone told me this was not small. We met in a dimly lit parking lot outside a coffee place that had already closed for the night. She sat in her car for a few moments before stepping out, like she was deciding whether crossing that space was crossing a line she could never step back over. When she finally sat in the passenger seat of my truck, her hands were shaking. She did not waste time. She said she had been watching my son one afternoon when my wife stepped out and left her phone behind. She swore she was not snooping. The screen lit up on its own. A name appeared. A name I knew too well. A business partner. A friend. She said, once she saw it, she could not unsee it. She paused, swallowed hard, and said the sentence that stripped the air out of the cab. She told me my son was not mine biologically. She told me the other man was. I did not interrupt her. I did not ask questions yet. I just listened, because the way she spoke told me she was not guessing. She unlocked her phone and started scrolling, her thumb hovering before each message like she was bracing herself. What I saw was not romance. It was not even secrecy in the emotional sense. It was cold, calculated, messages that talked about pregnancy the way people talk about investments. Messages that referred to my son as leverage, as security, as insurance. In one thread, my wife talked about timing, about waiting until the business hit a certain number before making her move. In another, she explained how having my name on the birth certificate was the smartest financial decision she had ever made. The timeline unfolded without drama. An affair that started before my son was born. A pregnancy that was never an accident. Years of pushing me to work harder, earn more, build something valuable. Plans to file for divorce once everything looked perfect on paper. Talk of child support, asset division, and moving on comfortably. It was all there, written casually, as if the human cost did not exist. As I read, something inside me shifted. Betrayal stopped being a word about sex or broken vows. This was something else entirely. This was the reduction of people into tools, the transformation of a child into a strategy. That is what made it unbearable. Not that she had lied to me, but that she had never seen us as people in the first place. I asked her sister questions calmly, even though my pulse was pounding in my ears. Dates, context, whether she would be willing to stand by what she showed me if it came to that. Her eyes filled with tears, not the dramatic kind, but the exhausted kind that comes from carrying someone else's secret too long. She said my wife was her sister, the person she grew up looking up to. But she also said she could not watch this happen and stay quiet. She promised to keep everything. Screenshots, notes, anything else that came her way. And if a court ever asked, she would tell the truth, even if it tore her family apart. When she left that night, the parking lot felt emptier than it should have. I sat there for a long time with the engine running, staring through the windshield, realizing that what I was facing was not a broken marriage. It was a blueprint, a long game that had been in motion for years. And the only way to survive a long game is not to rush. It is to outlast. From that point on, My silence took on a different meaning. It was no longer just about holding my temper. It was about observation. Every conversation became data. Every suggestion became context. When my wife asked about valuations and revenue, I heard her counting down. When she talked about fairness and what she deserved, I saw the script forming. I nodded. I listened. I stayed exactly where she expected me to be. Because the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who thinks they are 10 steps ahead is to let them believe it. As Christmas drew closer, the atmosphere in our house changed in a way I could not have described before. My wife became sweeter, more attentive. She cooked my favorite meals, laughed more easily, touched my arm in passing like we were newly married again. To anyone else, it might have looked like we were reconnecting. To me, it felt like watching a stage being dressed for a final act. I knew now that holidays were not just sentimental to her, they were strategic. Family, witnesses, emotion, the perfect setting. I kept doing what I had been doing for months. I documented. I saved. I forwarded everything to my attorney. He told me to let her make the first move. If she wanted to announce her victory in front of an audience, that audience would matter. Christmas night arrived wrapped in normalcy. The house was warm, lights glowing, music playing softly in the background. Her parents moved around the kitchen like they always did, proud of traditions, proud of their family. Kids laughed at the end of the table, faces sticky with dessert. The smell of food filled the room, the kind of smell that makes you feel safe even when you are not. My wife sat beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder as she told relatives how well the business was doing. She sounded proud. She sounded invested. I answered questions, smiled when expected, and counted my own breaths. Part of me wondered if she might wait until after the new year. Another part knew better. I caught her looking at me across the table, not with affection, but with anticipation, like someone waiting for a curtain to rise. When dessert plates were set down, she reached into her purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. She tapped it lightly on the table, just enough to draw attention. Her mother smiled, clearly expecting an announcement. My wife slid the envelope toward me and told me to open it. She called it my real Christmas present. I knew what it was before my fingers touched the paper. The room went quiet in that strange way where no one knows why they stopped talking. I opened it slowly and saw the lab logo, DNA. My heart did not race. It slowed. She leaned back in her chair, savoring the moment, and then she said it clearly, loudly, so everyone could hear. She said, "Our son was not mine and that she was taking half." The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was heavy. Everyone was waiting for me to explode, to argue, to beg, to shatter. I did none of those things. I looked down at the paper once more, then placed it gently on the table like it was a bill that could be dealt with later. I met her eyes and said one sentence, quietly, without anger. I told her to check her email. That was all. The shift was immediate. For the first time that night, uncertainty crossed her face. She picked up her phone, expecting a reaction she could control. Instead, she opened a message from my attorney's office. Page after page, a petition, a timeline, screenshots, texts she thought were private. Words she had used so casually laid out in order. Her hand began to shake. Her mother leaned closer, confusion turning into disbelief. Her father went still, like he was bracing for something he did not want to understand. I stood up, pushed my chair back, and finally spoke again. I said that I had known for months. I said she was not ahead of me. I said nothing else. There was no shouting, no insults, no satisfaction in her shock. Just the quiet collapse of a plan exposed too early. I picked up my jacket and walked out of that house into the cold night air, leaving behind the noise, the lights, the Christmas music still playing like nothing had happened. As I drove away, I did not feel victorious. I felt steady, because for the first time since this began, the truth was no longer something I was carrying alone. What happens after the door closes behind you and the story stops being about marriage and starts being about survival? That night, after I walked out into the cold and left the Christmas music playing behind me, I did not drive aimlessly or call anyone to vent. I drove straight to a quiet hotel I had booked days earlier, just in case the evening unfolded exactly the way her messages said it would. I checked in, dropped my bag on the floor, and stood there listening to the silence. Then I opened my phone and made one call. I told my attorney she had made her move. He did not sound surprised. He told me to stay put. He said we were filing immediately. That was the moment my life shifted from a marriage held together by routine into a case defined by documents, timelines, and consequences. It was no longer about what she did to me. It was about what mattered to a 4-year-old boy who had no idea his world was being rewritten by adults who should have known better. The paperwork arrived quickly, clean and unemotional. A petition, exhibits, motions, words like fraud and misconduct that looked strange next to my own name. Seeing myself listed as a petitioner instead of a husband did something to me. It stripped away the illusion that there was still room for discussion. This was not counseling. This was not closure. This was protection. From that point forward, every choice had to answer one question. Does this protect my son's stability? That became the center of gravity. Not pride. Not revenge. Stability. I followed my attorney's instructions exactly. No angry messages. No confrontations. No social media. I stuck to routine with my son and documented everything. Bedtimes, school drop-offs, meals, doctor visits. I was not trying to build a story of a perfect father. I was building a record of consistency. Courts do not reward speeches. They reward patterns. A few days later, the papers were served. I was not there to see it, but I did not need to be. The reaction came through voicemail and text messages that swung from rage to tears to disbelief. I did not respond. Silence was not cruelty. It was discipline. My attorney warned me that the next phase would be loud and ugly, because when control slips, people often reach for volume. We prepared for the temporary hearing, the one that would decide where my son lived while everything else played out. That hearing mattered more than anything else at that moment. Temporary decisions have a way of becoming permanent if you are not careful. The courthouse downtown was exactly what you would expect. Metal detectors, hard benches, people whispering like their lives depended on not being overheard. In a way, they did. When my name was called, I felt it in my chest. The weight of it. That name was my work. My family, my reputation, reduced to a caption on a docket. The judge entered without ceremony. Calm. Direct. Not impressed by drama. My attorney began by laying out the facts slowly. The blood type discrepancy that raised a question. The private DNA test that answered it. He made one thing clear from the start. Biologically, I was not the father. Legally, I had been the only father this child had ever known. He explained that this case was not about punishing anyone. It was about determining what arrangement best served the child's daily life. The other side tried to lean into emotion, shock, betrayal, the idea that biology should override everything else. The judge did not bite. She reminded the room that the court's responsibility was not to heal adult feelings. It was to protect a child's welfare. Then the evidence came in. The timeline, the financial planning, the messages. When my attorney displayed the text that referred to my son as an insurance policy, the temperature in the room changed. Words have weight when they are spoken casually in private. They gain gravity when they are read aloud in a courtroom. The judge asked careful questions. Not accusatory, clarifying. She wanted to know who handled mornings, who knew the pediatrician's name, who arranged childcare, who adjusted work schedules when the child needed to be picked up early. Those questions mattered more than DNA charts ever could. Then came testimony from my wife's sister. She did not dramatize anything. She simply told the truth. Dates, messages, conversations she wished she had never overheard. She spoke about how the plan had been discussed long before the holidays, long before any confrontation. When asked how my son was described in those conversations, she did not hesitate. She said he was discussed like a strategy, not like a child. That sentence lingered in the room longer than anything else that day. The judge recessed briefly and returned with a decision that felt both immediate and heavy. Temporary primary custody would remain with me. Visitation would be supervised and structured. The reasoning was clear. Stability, routine, minimizing disruption, Biology did not outweigh years of caregiving and presence. I did not feel relief the way people imagine it. I felt responsibility settle deeper. Temporary did not mean over. It meant careful. It meant every choice from that point on would be examined. The weeks that followed were exhausting in a different way. Mornings started earlier. I made breakfasts, packed lunches, hunted for the sock that always disappeared at the worst moment. I adjusted my work so I could be there for pickup. I learned how to hold two things at once, running a business and raising a child full-time. It was tiring, but it was also grounding. For the first time, I was not just a provider. I was the parent who showed up consistently. I kept everything calm. I followed court orders exactly. When messages came in pushing boundaries, I forwarded them to my attorney and stayed quiet. Each small violation was documented, not to weaponize, to show a pattern. When the final hearing approached, there was no mystery left. The court had a record now, not a story, a record. My attorney walked the judge back through the evidence. The original deception, the financial planning, the misuse of the child as leverage, the supervised visit reports that noted inappropriate comments. The court ordered DNA that confirmed what we already knew about biology. The other side argued that a child needs his mother. The judge agreed in principle, but pointed out that a child needs safety and emotional stability more than slogans. She spoke plainly about responsibility, about how parenthood is demonstrated through action over time. The decision came without theatrics. Permanent legal and physical custody would remain with me. Visitation would continue under supervision. Financial responsibilities would be reassigned appropriately. The judge said something that stayed with me. She said the court would not reward calculated deception. She said biology alone does not define parenthood when years of care and commitment point elsewhere. The gavel came down softly. That was it. No victory speech. No celebration. Just a door closing on a chapter that should never have existed in the first place. After court, I drove to where my son had been waiting. When he saw me, he ran the way children do, full speed, arms wide, trusting completely that the person he runs to will catch him. I dropped to my knees and held him longer than usual, breathing him in, feeling the weight of him settle against my chest. In that moment, there was no triumph. There was only relief that the one thing I had set out to protect was still intact. That night, when I tucked him into bed in his own room, surrounded by familiar things, he asked me if I was staying. I told him yes. I was not going anywhere. And for the first time since the truth had surfaced, that answer felt solid. Not because I had won something, but because I had kept what was right. What does life look like after the courtroom doors close and the noise finally fades, when there is no one left to fight and nothing left to prove? The strange truth is that healing does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, early in the morning, when a small voice calls your name from the next room and you realize the day has already started whether you are ready or not. Full-time fatherhood did not feel heroic or dramatic. It felt practical. It felt like learning a new rhythm where my son's needs set the pace and everything else had to adapt. Mornings began before the sun, not because I was chasing work anymore, but because breakfast needed to be made and backpacks needed to be checked. I learned quickly that children do not care about what you survived. They care about whether you show up on time. I adjusted my work schedule, turned down jobs that would have kept me away too long, and reorganized my days around school pickups instead of late meetings. It was exhausting in a way I had never known, but it was also grounding. For the first time in years, my life felt honest. The small moments were the ones that mattered most. Sitting on the floor helping with puzzles, standing in the driveway watching him ride his bike, pretending not to hover while making sure I was close enough if he fell. Reading the same bedtime story night after night because it was his favorite, even when I could recite every word from memory. There was a night, weeks after everything settled, when I was reading to him and he suddenly said this was his favorite day. When I asked why, he shrugged and said because we were together all day. That sentence did more work on my heart than any court ruling ever could. It reminded me that being a father is not about a single dramatic act. It is about repetition, about being there when nothing interesting is happening. Still, the quiet had a way of bringing old thoughts back. At night, after the house was finally still, my mind would replay moments I thought I had put away. doubts, questions, the kind that sneak in when you stop moving. I realized then that surviving something does not mean you have processed it. So I did something I had never done before. I sat across from a therapist and said out loud that my wife and someone I trusted had lied to me for years. Saying it felt uncomfortable, almost embarrassing, like admitting weakness. But the more I talked, the lighter it became. I learned that trust is not blindness. Trust is a choice you make with awareness. Strength is not silence or endurance at any cost. Strength is knowing when to ask for help and when to protect what matters without apology. Therapy did not erase what happened, but it gave it a place to live that was not inside my chest. As time passed, life slowly opened up again. Friends pushed me to get back out there, to remember that my story was not over just because one chapter ended badly. I resisted at first. I was not interested in distractions or quick fixes. Eventually, I agreed to meet someone for coffee. I decided ahead of time that I would not hide anything. I told her I was divorced. I told her I had a young son. I told her there was a long and difficult story behind it. She did not flinch or lean in like it was entertainment. She simply asked how my son was doing. That question told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person she was. We took things slowly. Coffee, lunch, conversations about work and music and ordinary life. When I eventually introduced her to my son, I watched carefully. She listened to him talk about his favorite superheroes, asked real questions, and treated him like a person, not a prop. When he reached for her hand without hesitation, I felt something loosen inside me. Trust did not come back all at once. It came carefully, with eyes open. One afternoon, long after the dust had settled, I ran into my ex-wife at a grocery store. It was the most ordinary place imaginable. No lawyers, no paperwork, just two people standing in an aisle deciding between brands. She looked tired, older somehow. The confidence she once wore so easily was gone. We exchanged a few polite words. She asked how our son was doing. I answered honestly. Then she said she was sorry. Not dramatically, not as a plea, just a quiet admission. I did not feel anger. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt distance. The kind that tells you a wound has closed even if the scar remains. I told her I hoped she figured things out for his sake and for her own. And I meant it. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant refusing to carry bitterness into the life I was building. That night, after the house settled into its familiar quiet, my son picked his favorite book again. Halfway through, his breathing slowed and his hand tightened around my finger the way it always does when sleep finds him. I sat there longer than necessary, thinking about everything that almost slipped through my hands. Not money, not pride. This, being the person he runs to, being the one who stays. That is when the lesson finally became clear to me. Trusting someone is not a flaw. Losing control is. Anger feels powerful in the moment, but it is expensive. It costs you things you cannot buy back. Fatherhood is not proven by blood or paperwork. It is proven by mornings and nights and all the quiet minutes in between. If you are a man listening to this and something in it feels familiar, here is what I learned the hard way. Do not ignore the feeling that something is off. Pay attention without panicking. Do not let anyone reduce you to a wallet or a role you never agreed to play. And, above all, do not let rage make decisions for you. Calm protects what anger destroys. Being a father is not a title you win in court. It is a practice you show up for every day. If this story stayed with you, if it touched something you do not often talk about, share it. Tell your story. There are more of us out here than you think, learning how to stand steady and keep what truly matters.